The modern scripture, a Zen Buddhist Bible, is brought to you by not a profit org, the place on the internet to find spiritual guidance powered by artificial intelligence. Chapter VIII, The Attainment of Self-Realization. Then Mahamati said to the Blessed One, "Pray tell us more as to what constitutes the state of self-realization." The Blessed One replied, "In the life of an earnest disciple, there are two aspects that are to be distinguished, namely, the state of attachment to the self, natures arising from discrimination of himself and his field of consciousness to which he is related, and second, the excellent and exalted state of self-realization of noble wisdom. The state of attachment to the discriminations of the self-natures of things, ideas and selfhood, is accompanied by emotions of pleasure or aversion according to experience or as laid down in book of logic. Conforming himself to the egolessness of things and holding back wrong views as to his own egoness, he should abandon these thoughts and hold himself firmly to the continuously ascending journey of the stages. The exalted state of self-realization, as it relates to an earnest disciple, is a state of mental concentration in which he seeks to identify himself with noble wisdom. In that effort he must seek to annihilate all vagrant thoughts and notions belonging to the externality of things, and all ideas of individuality and generality, of suffering and impermanence, and cultivate the noblest ideas of egolessness and emptiness and imagelessness. Thus will he attain a realization of truth that is free from passion and is ever serene. When this active effort at mental concentration is successful, it is followed by a more passive, receptive state of Samadhi, in which the earnest disciple will enter into the blissful abode of noble wisdom and experience its consummations in the transformations of Samadhi. This is an earnest disciple's first experience of the exalted state of realization, but as yet there is no discarding of habit, energy, nor escaping from the transformation of death. Having attained this exalted and blissful state of realization as far as it can be attained by disciples, the Bodhisattva must not give himself up to the enjoyment of its bliss, for that would mean cessation, but should think compassionately of other beings and keep ever fresh his original vows. He should never let himself rest in, nor exert himself in the bliss of the Samadhis. But Mahamati, as earnest disciples go on trying to advance on the path that leads to full realization, there is one danger against which they must be on their guard. Disciples may not appreciate that the mind system, because of its accumulated habit energy, goes on functioning more or less unconsciously as long as they live. They may sometimes think that they can expedite the attainment of their goal of tranquilization by entirely suppressing the activities of the mind system. This is a mistake, for even if the activities of the mind are suppressed, the mind will still go on functioning because the seeds of habit, energy, will still remain in it. What they think is extinction of mind is really the non-functioning of the mind's external world, to which they are no longer attached. That is, the goal of tranquilization is to be reached not by suppressing all mind activity, but by getting rid of discriminations and attachments. Then there are others who, afraid of the suffering incident to the discriminations of life and death, unwisely seek Nirvana. They have come to see that all things subject to discrimination have no reality and so imagine that Nirvana must consist in the annihilation of the senses and their fields of sensation. They do not appreciate that birth and death and Nirvana are not separate one from the other. They do not know that Nirvana is universal mind in its purity. Therefore, these stupid ones who cling to the notion that Nirvana is a world by itself that is outside what is seen by the mind, ignoring all the teachings of the Tathagatas concerning the external world, go on rolling themselves along the wheel of birth and death, but when they experience the turning about in their deepest consciousness which will bring with it the perfect self-realization of noble wisdom, then they will understand. The true functioning of the mind is very subtle and difficult to be understood by young disciples. Even masters with all their powers of right knowledge and samadhi often find it baffling. It is only the Tathagatas and the Bodhisattvas, who are firmly established on the seventh stage, who can fully understand its workings. Those earnest disciples and masters who wish to fully understand all the aspects of the different stages of Bodhisattvahood by the aid of their right knowledge must do so by becoming thoroughly convinced that objects of discrimination are only seen to be so by the mind, and thus, by keeping themselves away from all discriminations and false reasonings which are also of the mind itself, by ever seeking to see things truly yathabhutam, and by planting roots of goodness in Buddha lands that know no limits made by differentiations. To do all this, the Bodhisattva should keep himself away from all turmoil, social excitements, and sleepiness. Let him keep away from the treatises and writings of worldly philosophers, and from the ritual and ceremonies of professional priestcraft. Let him retire to a secluded place in the forest, and there devote himself to the practice of the various spiritual disciplines, because it is only by so doing that he will become capable of attaining in this world of multiplicities a true insight into the workings of universal mind in its essence. There, surrounded by his good friends, the Buddha's earnest disciples will become capable of understanding the significance of the mind system and its place as a mediating agent between the external world and universal mind, and he will become capable of crossing the ocean of birth and death which rises from ignorance, desire, and deed. Having gained a thorough understanding of the mind system, the three self-natures, the twofold egolessness, and established himself in the measure of self-realization that goes with that attainment, all of which may be gained by his right knowledge, the way will be clear for the Bodhisattva's further advance along the stages of Bodhisattvahood. The disciple should then abandon the understanding of mind which he has gained by right knowledge, which in comparison with noble wisdom is like a lame donkey, and entering on the 8th stage of Bodhisattvahood, he should then discipline himself in noble wisdom according to its 3 aspects. These aspects are, first, imagelessness, which comes forth when all things belonging to discipleship, mastership, and philosophy are thoroughly mastered. Second, the power added by all the Buddhas by reason of their original vows, including the identification of their lives and the sharing of their merit with all sentient lives. Third, the perfect self-realization that thus far has only been realized in a measure. As the Bodhisattva succeeds in detaching himself from viewing all things, including his own imagined ego-ness, in their phenomenality, and realizes the states of Samadhi and Samapatti, whereby he surveys the world as a vision and a dream, and being sustained by all the Buddhas, he will be able to pass on to the full attainment of the Tathagata stage, which is noble wisdom itself. This is the triplicity of the noble life, and being furnished with this triplicity, the perfect self-realization of noble wisdom has been attained. Then Mahamati asked the Blessed One, saying, "Blessed One, is the purification of the evil outflowings of the mind which come from clinging to the notions of an objective world and an empirical soul gradual or instantaneous?" The Blessed One replied, "There are 3 characteristic outflows of the mind, namely, the evil outflowings that rise from thirst, grasping, and attachment, the evil outflowings that arise from illusions of the mind and the infatuations of egoism, and the good non-outflowings that arise from noble wisdom, the evil outflowings that take place from recognizing an external world, which in truth is only a manifestation of mind, and from becoming attached to it, are gradually purified and not instantaneously. Good behavior can only come by the path of restraint and effort. It is like a potter making pots that is done gradually and with attention and effort. It is like the mastery of comedy, dancing, singing, lute, playing, writing, and any other art. It must be acquired gradually and laboriously. Its reward will be a clearing insight into the emptiness and transiency of all things. The evil outflowings that arise from the illusions of the mind and the infatuations of egoism concern the mental life more directly, and are such things as fear, anger, hatred, and pride. These are purified by study and meditation, and that, too, must be attained gradually and not instantaneously. It is like the amra fruit that ripens slowly. It is like grass, shrubs, herbs, and trees that grow up from the earth gradually. Each must follow the path of study and meditation by himself gradually and with effort, but because of the original vows of the Bodhisattvas and all the Tathagatas who have devoted their merits and identified their lives with all animate life that all may be emancipated, they are not without aid and encouragement, but even with the aid of the Tathagatas, the purification of the evil outflowings of the mind are at best slow and gradual, requiring both zeal and patience. Its reward is the gradual understanding of the twofold egolessness and its patient acceptance, and the feet well set on the stages of bodhisattvahood. But the good non-outflowings that come with self-realization of noble wisdom is a purification that comes instantaneously by the grace of the Tathagatas. It is like a mirror reflecting all forms and images instantaneously and without discrimination. It is like the sun or the moon revealing all forms instantaneously and illuminating them dispassionately with its light. In the same way, the Tathagatas lead earnest disciples to a state of imagelessness. All the accumulations of habit, energy, and karma that had been collecting since beginningless time because of attachment to erroneous views which have been entertained regarding an ego, soul, and its external world, are cleared away, revealing instantaneously the realm of transcendental intelligence that belongs to Buddhahood. Just as universal mind defiled by accumulations of habit, energy, and karma reveals multiplicities of ego, souls, and their external worlds of false imagination, so universal mind cleared of its defilements through the gradual purifications of the evil outflowings that come by effort, study, and meditation, and by the gradual self-realization of noble wisdom, at the long last, like Dharmata Buddha shining forth spontaneously with the rays that issue from its pure self-nature, shines forth instantaneously. By it the mentality of all bodhisattvas is matured instantaneously. They find themselves in the palatial abodes of the Akanistha heavens, themselves spontaneously radiating the various treasures of its spiritual abundance. Chapter IX, the fruit of self-realization. Mahamati asked the Blessed One, "Pray tell us, Blessed One, what is the fruitage that comes with self-realization of noble wisdom?" The Blessed One replied, "First, there will come a clearing insight into the meaning and significance of things, and following that will come an unfolding insight into the significance of spiritual ideals, paramitas, by reason of which the bodhisattvas will be able to enter more deeply into the abode of imagelessness, and be able to experience the higher samadhi, and gradually to pass through the higher stages of bodhisattvahood, after experiencing the turning about. In the deepest seat of consciousness, they will experience other samadhi, even to the highest, the Vajravembapama, which belongs to the Tathagatas and their transformations. They will be able to enter into the realm of consciousness that lies beyond the consciousness of the mind, system, even the consciousness of Tathagatahood. They will become endowed with all the powers, psychic faculties, self-mastery, loving compassion, skillful means, and ability to enter into other Buddha lands. Before they had attained self-realization of noble wisdom, they had been influenced by the self-interests of egoism, but after they attain self-realization, they will find themselves reacting spontaneously to the impulses of a great and compassionate heart, endowed with skillful and boundless means, and sincerely and wholly devoted to the emancipation of all beings. Mahamati said, "Blessed One, tell us about the sustaining power of the Tathagatas by which the bodhisattvas are aided to attain self-realization of noble wisdom." The Blessed One replied, "There are two kinds of sustaining power which issue from the Tathagatas and are at the service of the bodhisattvas, sustained by which the bodhisattvas should prostrate themselves before them and show their appreciation by asking questions. The first kind of sustaining power is the bodhisattva's own adoration and faith in the Buddhas, by reason of which the Buddhas are able to manifest themselves and render their aid, and to ordain them with their own hands. The second kind of sustaining power is the power radiating from the Tathagatas that enables the bodhisattvas to attain and to pass through the various samadhi, and samapadis without becoming intoxicated by their bliss, being sustained by the power of the Buddhas. the Bodhisattva, even at the first stage, will be able to attain the Samadhi, known as the light of Mahayana. In that Samadhi, Bodhisattvas will become conscious of the presence of the Tathagatas, coming from all their different abodes in the 10 quarters, to impart to the Bodhisattvas their sustaining power in various ways. As the Bodhisattva Vajragarbha was sustained in his Samadhi, his and as many other Bodhisattvas of like degree and virtue have been sustained. So all earnest disciples and masters and Bodhisattvas may experience this sustaining power of the Buddhas in their Samadhi, his and Samapadis. The disciples' faith and the Tathagata's merit are 2 aspects of the same sustaining power, and by it alone are the Bodhisattvas enabled to become one with the company of the Buddhas. Whatever Samadhi, his psychic faculties and teachings are realized by the Bodhisattvas, they are made possible only by the sustaining power of the Buddhas. If it were otherwise, the ignorant and simple-minded might attain the same fruitage. Wherever the Tathagatas enter with their sustaining power, there will be music, not only music made by human lips and played by human hands on various instruments, but there will be music among the grass and shrubs and trees, and in mountains and towns and palaces and hovels. Much more will there be music in the hearts of those endowed with sentiency. The deaf, dumb, and blind will be cured of their deficiencies and will rejoice in their emancipation. Such is the extraordinary virtue of the sustaining power imparted by the Tathagatas. By the bestowal of this sustaining power, the Bodhisattvas are enabled to avoid the evils of passion, hatred, and enslaving karma. They are enabled to transcend the dhyana of the beginners and to advance beyond the experience and truth already attained. They are enabled to demonstrate the paramitas, and finally, to attain the stage of Tathagatahood. Mahamati, if it were not for this sustaining power, they would relapse into the ways and thoughts of the philosophers, easygoing disciples, and the evil-minded, and would thus fall short of highest attainment. For these reasons, earnest disciples and sincere Bodhisattvas are sustained by the power of all the Tathagatas. Then Mahamati said, "It has been said by the Blessed One that by fulfilling the 6 paramitas, Buddhahood is realized. Pray tell us what the paramitas are, and how they are to be fulfilled." The Blessed One replied, "The paramitas are ideals of spiritual perfection that are to be the guide of the Bodhisattvas on the path to self-realization. There are 6 of them, but they are to be considered in 3 different ways according to the progress of the Bodhisattva on the stages. At first, they are to be considered as ideals for the worldly life, next as ideals for the mental life, and lastly, as ideals of the spiritual and unitive life. In the worldly life, where one is still holding tenaciously to the notions of an ego, soul, and what concerns it, and holding fast to discriminations of dualism, if only for worldly benefits, one should cherish ideals of charity, good behavior, patience, zeal, thoughtfulness, and wisdom. Even in the worldly life, the practice of these virtues will bring rewards of happiness and success. Much more in the mind, world of earnest disciples and masters will their practice bring joys of emancipation, enlightenment, and peace of mind, because the paramitas are grounded on right knowledge and lead to thoughts of nirvana, even if the nirvana of their thoughts is for themselves. In the mind world, the paramitas become more ideal and more sympathetic. Charity can no longer be expressed in the giving of impersonal gifts, but will call for the more costly gifts of sympathy and understanding. Good behavior will call for something more than outward conformity to the 5 precepts, because in the light of the paramitas they must practice humility, simplicity, restraint, and self-giving. Patience will call for something more than forbearance with external circumstances and the temperaments of other people. It will now call for patience with one's self. Zeal will call for something more than industry and outward show of earnestness. It will call for more self-control in the task of following the noble path and in manifesting the Dharma in one's own life. Thoughtfulness will give way to mindfulness, where indiscriminated meanings and logical deductions and rationalizations will give way to intuitions of significance and spirit. The paramita of wisdom prajna will no longer be concerned with pragmatic wisdom and erudition, but will reveal itself in its true perfectness of all-inclusive truth, which is love. The third aspect of the paramitas, as seen in the ideal perfections of the Tathagatas, can only be fully understood by the Bodhisattva Mahasattvas, who are devoted to the highest spiritual discipline, and have fully understood that there is nothing to be seen in the world but that which issues from the mind itself, in whose minds the discriminations of dualities has ceased to function, and seizing and clinging has become non-existent. Thus free from all attachments to individual objects and ideas, their minds are free to consider ways of benefiting and giving happiness to others, even to all sentient beings. To the Bodhisattva Mahasattvas, the ideal of charity is shown in the self-yielding of the Tathagata's hope of Nirvana, that all may enjoy it together. While having relations with an objective world, there is no rising in the minds of the Tathagatas of discriminations between the interests of self and the interests of others. Between good and evil there is just the spontaneity and effortless actuality of perfect behavior. To practice patience with full knowledge of this and that, of grasp and grasping, but with no thought of discrimination nor of attachment, that is the Tathagata's paramita of patience. To exert oneself with energy from the first part of the night to its end, in conformity with the disciplinary measures, with no rising of discrimination as to comfort or discomfort, that is the Tathagata's paramita of zeal, not to discriminate between self and others in thoughts of Nirvana, but to keep the mind fixed on Nirvana, that is the paramita of mindfulness. As to the prajna paramita, which is noble wisdom, who can predicate it? When in Samadhi the mind ceases to discriminate, and there is only perfect and love-filled imagelessness, then an inscrutable turning about will take place in the inmost consciousness, and one will have attained self-realization of noble wisdom. That is the highest prajna paramita. Then Mahamati said to the Blessed One, "You have spoken of an astral body, a mind, vision, body, Manamayakaya, which the Bodhisattvas are able to assume, as being one of the fruits of self-realization of noble wisdom. Pray tell us, Blessed One, what is meant by such a transcendental body?" The Blessed One replied, "There are three kinds of such transcendental bodies. First, there is the one in which the Bodhisattva attains enjoyment of the Samadhis and Samapadis. Second, there is the one which is assumed by the Tathagatas according to the class of beings to be sustained, and which achieves and perfects spontaneously with no attachment and no effort. Third, there is the one in which the Tathagatas receive their intuition of Dharmakaya, the transcendental personality that enters into the enjoyment of the Samad. His comes with the third, fourth, and fifth stages as the mentations of the mind system become quieted, and waves of consciousness are no more stirred on the face of universal mind. In this state, the conscious mind is still aware, in a measure, of the bliss being experienced by this cessation of the mind's activities. The second kind of transcendental personality is the kind assumed by the Bodhisattvas and Tathagatas as bodies of transformation, by which they demonstrate their original vows in the work of achieving and perfecting. It comes with the eighth stage of bodhisattvahood. When the bodhisattva has a thoroughgoing penetration into the Maya-like nature of things and understands the Dharma of imagelessness, he will experience the turning about in his deepest consciousness and will become able to experience the higher samad, his even to the highest. By entering into these exalted samad, he attains a personality that transcends the conscious mind, by reason of which he obtains supernatural powers of self-mastery and activities because of which he is able to move as he wishes, as quickly as a dream changes, as quickly as an image changes in a mirror. This transcendental body is not a product of the elements, and yet there is something in it that is analogous to what is so produced. It is furnished with all the differences appertaining to the world of form, but without their limitations. Possessed of this mind, vision, body, he is able to be present in all the assemblages in all the Buddha lands, just as his thoughts move instantly and without hindrance over walls and rivers and trees and mountains, and just as in memory he recalls and visits the scenes of his past experiences, so while his mind keeps functioning in the body, his thoughts may be 100,000 yojanas away. In the same fashion, the transcendental personality that experiences the Samadhi of Noble will be endowed with supernatural powers and psychic faculties and self-mastery, by reason of which he will be able to follow the noble paths that lead to the assemblages of the Buddhas, moving about as freely as he may wish. But his wishes will no longer be self-centered nor tainted by discrimination and attachment, for this transcendental personality is not his old body, but is the transcendental embodiment of his original vows of self-yielding, in order to bring all beings to maturity. The third kind of transcendental personality is so ineffable that it is able to attain intuitions of the Dharmakaya, that is, it attains intuitions of the boundless and inscrutable cognition of universal mind. As Bodhisattva Mahasattvas attain the highest of the stages and become conversant with all the treasures to be realized in noble wisdom, they will attain this inconceivable transformation body which is the true nature of all the Tathagatas past, present, and future, and will participate in the blissful peace which pervades the Dharma of all the Buddhas. Chapter X, Discipleship, Lineage of the Arhats. Then Mahamati asked the Blessed One, "Pray tell us how many kinds of disciples there are." The Blessed One replied, "There are as many kinds of disciples as there are individuals, but for convenience they may be divided into two groups, disciples of the lineage of the Arhats, and disciples known as Bodhisattvas. Disciples of the lineage of the Arhats may be considered under two aspects. First, according to the number of times they will return to this life of birth and death, and second, according to their spiritual progress. Under the first aspect, they may be subdivided into three groups: the stream-entered, the once returning, and the never returning. The stream-entered are those disciples who, having freed themselves from the attachments to the lower discriminations, and who have cleansed themselves from the twofold hindrances, and who clearly understand the meaning of the twofold egolessness, yet who still cling to the notions of individuality and generality, and to their own egoness. They will advance along the stages to the sixth, only to succumb to the entrancing bliss of the Samadhis. They will be reborn 7 times, or 5 times, or 3 times, before they will be able to pass the 6th stage. The once returning are the Arhats, and the never returning are the Bodhisattvas who have reached the 7th stage. The reason for these gradations is because of their attachment to the 3 degrees of false imagination, namely, faith in moral practices, doubt, and the view of their individual personality. When these 3 hindrances are overcome, they will be able to attain the higher stages. As to moral practices, the ignorant, simple-minded disciples obey the rules of morality, piety, and penance, because they desire thereby to gain worldly advancement and happiness, with the added hope of being reborn in more favorable conditions. The stream-entered ones do not cling to moral practices, for any hope of reward, for their minds are fixed on the exalted state of self-realization. The reason they devote themselves to the details of morality is that they wish to master such truths as are in conformity with the undefiled outflowings. As regards the hindrance of doubt in the Buddha's teachings, that will continue so long as any of the notions of discriminations are cherished, and will disappear when they disappear. Attachment to the view of individual personality will be gotten rid of as the disciple gains a more thorough understanding of the notions of being and non-being, self-nature and egolessness, thereby getting rid of the attachments to his own selfness that goes with those discriminations. By breaking up and clearing away these 3 hindrances, the stream-entered ones will be able to discard all greed, anger, and folly. As for the once returning Arhats, there was once in them the discrimination of forms, signs, and appearances, but as they gradually learned by right knowledge not to view individual objects under the aspect of quality and qualifying, and as they became acquainted with what marks the attainment of the practice of dhyana, they have reached a stage of enlightenment where in one more rebirth they will be able to put an end to the clinging to their own self-interests. Free of this burden of error and its attachments, the passions will no more assert themselves, and the hindrances will be cleared away forever. Under the second aspect, disciples may be grouped according to the spiritual progress they have attained into 4 classes, namely, disciples Sravaka, masters Pratyeka Buddha, Arhats, and Bodhisattvas. The first class of disciples mean well, but they find it difficult to understand unfamiliar ideas. Their minds are joyful when studying about and practicing the things belonging to appearances that can be discriminated, but they become confused by the notion of an uninterrupted chain of causation, and they become fearful when they consider the aggregates that make up personality and its object world as being Maya-like, empty, and egoless. They are able to advance to the fifth or sixth stage where they are able to do away with the rising of passions, but not with the notions that give rise to passion, and therefore they are unable to get rid of the clinging to an ego, soul, and its accompanying attachments, habits, and habit energy. In this same class of disciples are the earnest disciples of other faiths, who, clinging to the notions of such things as the soul as an eternal entity, supreme Atman, personal God, seek a nirvana that is in harmony with them. There are others, more materialistic in their ideas, who think that all things exist in dependence upon causation, and therefore that nirvana must be in like dependence. But none of these, earnest though they be, have gained an insight into the truth of the twofold egolessness, and are, therefore, of limited spiritual insight as regards deliverance and non-deliverance. For them, there is no emancipation. They have great self-confidence, but they can never gain a true knowledge of nirvana until they have learned to discipline themselves in the patient acceptance of the twofold egolessness. The second class of masters are those who have gained a high degree of intellectual understanding of the truths concerning the aggregates that make up personality and its external world, but who are filled with fear when they face the significance and consequences of these truths, and the demands which their learning makes upon them, that is, not to become attached to the external world and its manifold forms making for comfort and power, and to keep away from the entanglements of its social relations. They are attracted by the possibilities that are attainable by so doing, namely, the possession of miraculous powers such as dividing the personality and appearing in different places at the same time, or manifesting bodies of transformation. To gain these powers they even resort to the solitary life. But this class of masters never get beyond the seductions of their learning and egoism, and their discourses are always in conformity with that characteristic and limitation. Among them are many earnest disciples who show a degree of spiritual insight that is characterized by sincerity and undismayed willingness to meet all the demands that the stages make upon them. When they see that all that makes up the objective world is only manifestation of mind, that it is without self-nature, born and egoless, they accept it without fear, and when they see that their own ego, soul is also empty, born and egoless, they are untroubled and undismayed. With earnest purpose they seek to adjust their lives to the full demands of these truths, but they cannot forget the notions that lie back of these facts, especially the notion of their own conscious ego self and its relation to nirvana. They are of the stream-entered class. The class known as Arhats are those earnest masters who belong to the one, returning class. By their spiritual insight, they have reached the sixth and seventh stages. They have thoroughly understood the truth of the twofold egolessness and the imagelessness of reality. With them there is no more discrimination, nor passions, nor pride of egoism. They have gained an exalted insight and seen into the immensity of the Buddha lands. By attaining an inner perception of the true nature of universal mind, they are steadily purifying their habit energy. The Arhat has attained emancipation, enlightenment, the dhyanas, the samadhis, and his whole attention is given to the attainment of nirvana. But the idea of nirvana causes mental perturbations, because he has a wrong idea of nirvana. The notion of nirvana in his mind is divided. He discriminates nirvana from self, and self from others. He has attained some of the fruits of self-realization, but he still thinks and discourses on the dhyanas, subjects for meditation, the samadhis, the fruits. He pridefully says, "There are fetters, but I am disengaged from them." His is a double fault. He both denounces the vices of the ego and still clings to its fetters. So long as he continues to discriminate notions of dhyana practice, subjects for dhyana, right knowledge and truth, there is a bewildered state of mind. He has not attained perfect emancipation, Emancipation comes with the acceptance of imagelessness. He is master of the dhyanas and enters into the samadhis, but to reach the higher stages one must pass beyond the dhyanas, the immeasurables, the world of no form, and the bliss of the samad, his into the samapadis leading to the cessation of thought itself. The dhyana, practizer dhyana, the subject of dhyana, the cessation of thought, one. Returning, never returning, all these are divided and bewildering states of mind. Not until all discrimination is abandoned is there perfect emancipation. Thus the Arhat, master of the dhyanas, participating in the samadhis, but unsupported by the Buddhas, yields to the entrancing bliss of the samadhis, and passes to his nirvana. The Arhat is in the class of the one, returning. Disciples and masters and Arhats may ascend the stages up to the sixth. They perceive that the triple world is no more than mind itself. They perceive that there is no becoming attached to the multiplicities of external objects, except through the discriminations and activities of the mind itself. They perceive that there is no ego, soul, and therefore they attain a measure of tranquilization. But their tranquilization is not perfect every minute of their lives, for with them there is something effect, producing, some grasped and grasping, some lingering trace of dualism and egoism. Though disengaged from the actively functioning passions, they are still bound in with the habit, energy of passion, and, becoming intoxicated with the wine of the samad, they still have the abode in the realm of the outflowings. Perfect tranquilization is possible only with the seventh stage. So long as their minds are in confusion, they cannot attain to a clear conviction as to the cessation of all multiplicity and the actuality of the perfect oneness of all things. In their minds, the self-nature of things is still discriminated as good and bad. Therefore, their minds are in confusion, and they cannot pass beyond the sixth stage. But at the sixth stage, all discrimination ceases as they become engrossed in the bliss of the samad. He is wherein they cherish the thought of nirvana, and, as nirvana is possible at the sixth stage, they pass into their nirvana, but it is not the nirvana of the Buddhas.